So, thank you guys for coming. I want to introduce our speaker. All right, he's the Senior VP for how you say your name? Alchemy, right, sorry, Alchemy, right? And he is talking about the new attack frontier. Oh, hold on. This is a little wonky here. There it goes. All right, I hope everybody is in the right room. And let me tell you a fun fact about him. He just came back from Dubai, so ask him about that trip when you see him. And he writes for Forbes, so he's a very important guy. All right? Thank you, Rafiq.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Roger. Appreciate that. Akamai Technologies, Rupesh Chokshi, lovely to meet everybody, and I really appreciate all of you joining us today afternoon. Beautiful day out there, and Roger already announced all the alcohol and pubs and clubs and everything else that's going to happen, right? So, but before we get started, I just wanted to kind of give a big picture view, and then we'll get details into a lot of good insights and information.
Applications run nearly every aspect of your business and our world, making trillions of connections easier, but also more vulnerable to attack. That's why at Akamai, we focus on securing every critical application you run, with a broad solution portfolio that reliably stops the spread of ransomware, prevents the harvest of customer data and your IP, and ensures your business is always up and running. Our global platform gives us unmatched visibility into threats and how they change, intelligence we use to tune your defenses and protect every application that runs your business every day, so you can innovate and expand, confident that your applications will stay ahead of threats, everywhere, every time. Learn more at akamai.com/security.
So what I wanted to do was do a little bit of that kind of preamble to get us grounded, right? That we're focused on securing applications everywhere, every time. And we see tremendous amount of data, information, insights. So majority of this discussion talk is all about the state of the internet. What are we seeing? What are the insights? What's happening in the world of applications? What's happening with the attack surfaces? What's happening with the APIs? And we'll talk about AI, right? Because I cannot have a presentation without talking about AI, right? So we'll do that too. Let me start with sort of, what is really happening, right? APIs everywhere. APIs everywhere, all industry types, businesses, governments, school districts, healthcare, manufacturing, transportation, commerce, financial services, you name it. APIs are what is making this hyper-connected world work. And as we enter the AI era, we're seeing APIs even sort of more on steroids. And if you think about how agentic is going to come to life, it's going to utilize all of these APIs, right? So apps and APIs at the core of what we are seeing everywhere. And securing applications is harder than ever. And why is that, right? When you look at some of the numbers, 6 billion users on the internet, 75 billion IoT devices, and I'm sure these numbers are getting bigger by the minute, by the second. And then just the sheer amount of mobile applications download. Then you start and say, okay, what's the average number of apps somebody's using? What are the number of connected devices per household? The 7.4 million ChatGPT app downloads in the first 10 days, and on an average, 1,000 applications that a average enterprise is running based off on our surveys, right? So when you put all of this numbers and the math and the landscape and all of that together, your applications are running your business. We clearly know that. But the vulnerabilities, the threat landscape, the ecosystem is rapidly evolving, and it's becoming more complex and resulting in an ever-growing attack surface. And in the world of AI, that's going to be even more complicated, right? How do you discover what's really happening, what are all the Gen AI applications, what are you doing when it comes to conversational AI agents, internal, external, etc. So this continues to sort of, amplify and multiply, right? Even something as simple as, us coming over here to the conference, we looked at the weather app, we booked hotel, we bought some coffee, we did Uber, we did Lyft, we did something for transportation, we maybe somewhere, checked the stock market today. All of these things in the back end are driven by APIs. And a lot of these APIs are what is getting attacked. And that is what we saw in the latest SOTI report, that just the sheer amount and volume of attacks is just a very, very big and an insane number, right? So we saw 311 billion web and API attacks. And I want to say, if we really concentrate on that and think about how many of those APIs are under attack, right? I almost got to wait for the zeros to fill in here. But you get my point, right? In terms of, just in the last 2 years, amount of API attacks, 150 billion. 150 billion. We also did some analysis to see what was the damage or the cost to the businesses and the enterprise. And it was around 87 billion. $87 billion lost to cybercrime, breaches, other things for these businesses. And the forecasting is almost 100 billion for next year. So there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of protecting web applications and APIs, right? But just the sheer volume is what I want to demonstrate through this session in terms of what is happening every day. It's a big number, right? Lots of zeros. And lots of companies in the news, the most prominent one in the last 2 years is what Dell had, where there was an API abuse and 49 million records were stolen and then made publicly available. The hacker was somebody who was a very kind of arrogant person, actually gave an interview talking about what they did was kind of create a company, use the partner portal, and then leverage that API to systematically abstract 49 million records, every single laptop, server, etc., and then published it on the dark web, right? But you see every industry, you see examples of how all of these different things are happening, whether it is, again, data leakage, whether it is happening in terms of the user information or PII information, whether it's happening on attacking from an abuse and a logic perspective. We see all of that again and again and again and again and again, right? So very important that, you don't want your business, your enterprise, your company to be in the news, and there's a lot we can learn from the data. We can learn a lot about the insights, how we put them to use, etc. So let me go back and run a little video for all of you on how we are going to visualize the whole world and see where the attacks are happening, okay? So give me a second, and I'm going to run this video.
At Akamai, real-time threat intelligence informs our security operations and solutions every day. From our Network Operations Command Center, we monitor huge volumes of internet traffic data, but one data set is critical to our defense. The Akamai Global Security Visualization shows us the location of the most intense attacks across the globe and how effectively we're fighting them. Each beam of light represents a location. One of the 701 cities, 1,829 data centers, and 360,000 edge servers on our platform. The higher the spike, the bigger the number of web application firewall requests. The darker its color, the higher the ratio of malicious requests we're fighting. Zooming into the regional view, we see more data on active attack mitigations like this intense one in Hanoi. Going deeper, we get finer details including where the traffic connecting to the Hanoi data center originates, by city, which mitigation attacks are at work in the data center, and the distribution of attack categories. This is Akamai Real-Time Intelligence in action. Instant mitigation right where it matters, helping us deliver on the trust our customers place in us every day. Learn more at akamai.com/security.
So stop by the booth, 6245. We can go a lot deeper. But I wanted to show sort of, the visualization, right? In terms of you see the globe, you start to see the volume of the attacks, you see the color intensity that talks about what ratios are we seeing in terms of the malicious attacks. We see the origins, we see, what type of attacks. We can then look at what resolutions are brought forward, et cetera. So the SOTI report is a way of kind of packaging, synthesizing, and sharing all of that information, but we see that on a real-time basis. So a lot of security research that we do, the analytics that we do, the AI that we utilize is training off of all of this data that we see, right? So putting all of this information to good use when it comes to protections, detections, innovations, et cetera. And again, stop by the booth, we can go deeper into it. So what did we learn, right? We learned that it is a global phenomenon. So it's not just happening in North America or EMEA or Asia or LATAM, et cetera. It's a global phenomenon, right? And what we learned this year, or the data set said, hey, 116 billion, which was what EMEA saw as the largest number of, web application attacks and API attacks. And it is a big, big number, right? And the highest percentage, 37% globally. And then you kind of do some breakdowns and say, hey, what type of attacks are we seeing? Is it a local 5 injection? Is it a web attack? It's an active API, et cetera, right? So a lot of details for us to kind of unpack. And you say, why EMEA? Maybe there's a more kind of stronger adoption of APIs. Maybe there's more digitization happening. Maybe the defense systems are lower, right? There's a lot of reasons why all of that could be happening. And the more I sort of, travel some of the emerging, markets, as we were talking before, I was in Dubai and also in India, and I saw tremendous amount of digital native businesses, right? So a lot of new digital native businesses are coming up in sort of, growing and emerging economies, right? And all of that is powered by API. So it would be a little bit sort of, natural to see some of these countries and regions experiences even more and more. And maybe the good news is in North America, our defense systems are better, right? Or let's hope that they are, right? In terms of how we think about it. But the data is intriguing. It gives us a lot of different insights. So let me talk a little bit about an example, right? So this is a telecom, cable company. And, it was, again, a private API that was designed to work only in sort of, California-based resellers. They were communicating back and forth with this company. And then they were sort of, accessed by a high-risk European IP who hijacked the web token. And the way we learned about this is that we were actually in a proof of concept trial with the customer. We're running all of this stuff. And we said, we're starting to see all this sort of, API abuse taking place and data extraction in what you are showcasing or sharing that needs to be only accessed by California resellers is now being accessed by somebody, malicious from the EMEA or European IP. And, it was a lot of sensitive reports, data, et cetera. And we were able to kind of obviously pick it up because there was a mismatch when it comes to the geographical location and the intentions, et cetera, right? So again, a lot of things happen underneath when you think about detections and how one goes about it. But you can see prominent players making, simple mistakes, right? And we want to be mindful about that when it comes to those. Speaking of, who or what industry is most under attack? So 250 billion, right? You just see, again, really, really big numbers in billions. I hope it was, a number for revenue, but it's not for revenue, it's for attacks, right? And commerce is getting hit really big time. And, you think about all the online retailers, you think about all the businesses that are doing e-commerce or commerce in general are experiencing tremendous amount of attacks over here. And then again, there is, a double click to say, okay, why is it commerce, right? And why is it 3x? And you say, okay, maybe is it just the volume of interactions that they do? Is it something more to do with the types of interactions in terms of the supply chain, in terms of the dependencies that they have in the ecosystem, et cetera, right? Or maybe it is very easy for the bad guys and gals to profit from it, right? Maybe it is a lot easy to do extraction. It's a lot easy to benefit from it. So a lot of different things, play a big role in it. And I'll talk a little bit on sort of, who are the next three in line in terms of which verticals, which industries are getting, impacted, right? But high tech is the second most attacked, commerce at number one, and we'll go a little bit deeper into sort of, why. So let me talk a little bit about, an example, right? Which is, hey, you have a very large sort of, beverage giant, a retail beverage giant, and no centralized API governance, don't know much about the shadow APIs, the zombie APIs, kind of missing some of the core kind of information on how everything is organized. And the security team at this company said that, hey, we'll commission a bug bounty, right? That says that if you all go take a look at all our infrastructure or systems, how we communicate, how we do X, Y, and Z, and see if you can find a vulnerability. And the bug bounty did find a vulnerability, and it was an API. So an API was vulnerable. They were able to extract all of the names, emails, phone numbers, and addresses of almost 100 million users, right? So you can start to see real examples, different types of industries. And again, you would say, hey, the beverage company is probably not too focused on selling a singular beverage online, but the fact that they are part of this connected economy, the supply chain, the information flows that take place, and they have information about all of the end users and customers and clients, they are susceptible to these kind of challenges. Like luckily in this case, it was a sort of a pen testing type of a program that caught it. We were able to help them out and kind of take care of it, right? But again, the main point is that these things sound very simple, but the day the business and the enterprise in the news, there's a lot of crisis management, damage control, et cetera, simple mistakes, right? So what our data is saying is that when you see all of these attacks, a lot of them can be prevented. A lot of them can be fortified. A lot of them can be, you could have the right kind of armor to protect yourselves against it, right? And when people or companies or businesses are not thinking about visibility or governance or what all is happening, right? And we face this same sort of threat or challenge as we enter the AI work, right? So many of us don't know what all Gen AI applications, where are the LLMs being used, what information is being passed on to these interactions, right? And then we enter the world of agentic. We don't know, are all of these interactions, safe? Do we even know the credentials and how is it taking place, et cetera, et cetera. Our worlds are getting more complicated. Our worlds are getting more automated. And right now it feels like we're making simple mistakes. And I don't want us to make simple mistakes, right? We need to make sure that we're fortifying across the entire spectrum. So speaking of AI, again, a staggering stat here, right? Our team saw 500 million LLM scraping requests per day. So what's happening, right? You see every day, whether it is, ChatGPT or Gemini or Microsoft or others, the large companies that have the LLMs and the Gen AI applications, and they help you build a Gen AI application, et cetera. We see tremendous amount of AI crawlers on the internet, right? So if you think about when you go interact with a model, they are looking to learn and self-train and look for information, right? So a natural place would be to go onto the public internet, right? And we see a lot of scraping happening, right? In fact, scraping is some of the most common use cases when it comes to bots and botnets, right? You think about, the easiest example of probably a good or a valuable scraping is when we go to kayak.com or Expedia or some other place, and they go and look up all the airlines and hotels and give you a price, right? And sort of that is known information. But what if you are a high-tech company, or what if you're a healthcare company, and what if there's constant scraping of information when it comes to pricing, competitive information, when it's inventory? There's so many other valuable data points that your business has and needs, and all of those are being systematically extracted into this kind of massive, call it an LLM, call it AI, call it agentic, call it whatever, but this massive database that nobody has oversight or control on, right? My favorite joke when it comes to all of these things is that, somewhere somebody asked me, Rupesh, what do you think is the most utilized use case when it comes to LLMs or Gen AI? And I said it's performance reviews, because nobody's writing their performance reviews, right? ChatGPT or somebody else is writing their performance reviews. The managers are not writing their performance reviews, and they're also going there. So next time you want to look up and say, I want to hire Rupesh, I should ask ChatGPT and say, yeah, Rupesh was, did good in these areas, but had some of these exposures and needs improvement in public speaking, right? So things like that. And the best part is that there was somebody who, how many Claude or ChatGPT will give you some results back and say, are you satisfied with this, or do you want to improve? And the person actually cut and pasted the whole thing in the system. Did not even remove the statement on do you want to, change it or not. So next time, please at least, do a proper cut and paste, right? Maybe we'll find Agentic. Agentic can go do the cut and paste, and it'll be better than us. But anyway, so the point is a lot of data leakage, a lot of API exposure, a lot of different ways these things are utilizing. What we are seeing and sharing today is what we see at the broad scale when it comes to internet, right? And how all of these bots and all of these AI agents, malicious or otherwise, are trolling and trying to learn and find information, et cetera, which is fascinating. And this is a new data point for us too. Historically, we saw sort of, more of the web stuff. All right, so where is all the focus, right, when it comes to commerce, right? I talked about commerce at the center of the early scraping activity, talked about examples of the travel industry and what's happening over there, but still there is tremendous amount of information being picked up from the internet, from the APIs as a method, and then whether it is something that you want to share, don't want to share, et cetera. But you can see that the daily AI scraper activity is hitting all different industry types, right? And I know it's a little bit hard to see here, but it's, it's hitting the financial services, commerce, business services, gaming, gambling, high-tech, manufacturing, pharma, healthcare, public sector, social media, across the board, right? So big numbers, a lot of information that is moving on the public internet. So let's talk about, what is the, sort of like what is after or just next to commerce. And we were shocked to see healthcare, gambling, video media, and you see the percentages, right? 1,340% increase. I worry about the healthcare industry the most. Not an expert in all the regulations, but I feel that the amount of information that is floating around in that ecosystem, right? Think of it. You as an individual, your doctor's office, the clinic, the insurance company, the pharma, the prescription, the sort of the hospital, the this, the that, just the amount of touch points that are there and the interdependencies on that, right? And now we all live in this fantastic sort of, the wearable stuff, right? Whether somebody has to have a glucose monitor or they're doing Whoop or something like that. There's all these rings that are coming up, right? So what's happening? All of this information about you is getting collected, it is packaged, it is stored somewhere, and it is helping you. Yes, it's helping you as an individual to do better with your health, your eating habits, your sleeping habits, your workouts, your diet, your this, your that. But where is all of that information going? Do you even know that? If your doctor is utilizing an AI assistant to become more productive so he and she can see more patients or provide better healthcare, do you know where that information is going? Where is that information residing? Will that information pop up? Right? You don't know. So this whole idea that, hey, we have a tremendous amount of privacy, I think in this world that we live in is starting to be a little bit on shaky grounds, right? One of the interesting headlines that while I was waiting and preparing, which I just saw, and I took a picture of it, is CNN just did something and said, hey, folks under 18 should not utilize AI applications, and it's not safe, right? So teenagers and kids should not utilize because those applications are not safe. And they are probably even more sort of unfamiliar with privacy and data and information, et cetera, right? So when you see these kind of big acceleration, whether it is healthcare and gambling, gambling might be for a different reason, right? So it's not for the healthcare reasons they're seeing growth. They're seeing a different driver in terms of the ability for the bad guys to significantly monetize, right? In terms of financial gains, et cetera, is what we are seeing over here. But hey, old tactics, new scale, right? So API request constraint violation seems to be one of the largest green bars, as we can see over here. We also see the active attack sessions. They are far more frequently used vectors, vastly outweighing some of the other OWASP things. And I think maybe 4 years ago, it was all about the SQL injections. We are seeing a little bit of tampering on that, but we're seeing new attack vectors, and we're seeing new ways things are getting penetrated and being utilized, right? So going back to, we've seen sort of, if I do a little bit of a summarization, right? 311 billion web API attacks, 33% increase year over year, 150 billion on APIs. And then when you take this stats and you see that even the shift on the attack vectors, what was happening 2 years ago, what is happening now, right? So you start to kind of bring all of this information together. So obviously, the natural question is that, hey, Rupesh, we are here in this session. What is important? What are my gaps? How do I think about it? Et cetera, right? So on the API side, lots of shadow APIs, zombies, et cetera. So you have this tremendous amount of exposure. And every time we do something with a customer, we see the first aha, which is, hey, I thought I had 200 APIs or 1,000 APIs, and I have it in this spreadsheet. And then when you run all the discovery and the visibility, you probably see 1,000, maybe 17,000, maybe 20,000, right? So just the sprawl that your business has needs to be, very well understood. I think there is also a lot of business logic abuse happening with API, right? And a lot of authenticated ways to get in and then do the extractions. I think there's a lot of manipulation when it comes to loyalty programs and reward programs, et cetera, right? So, bad guys and gals are finding different ways to go in and see how they can benefit by that. And then, a lot of bot attacks that we see on the APIs, right? So part of it could be just to kind of overwhelm the system, bring it down, et cetera. But the bots are getting more and more sophisticated at the speed at which they do. If anything, they have put AI to use faster than all of us, right, in terms of use cases, et cetera. The application risks are also in more the authentication layer, and we see all of that with broken authentication, access controls. We see a lot of code injection, vulnerabilities and dependencies on open source, the whole supply chain aspect of how you're building applications, how you're putting all the stuff together. So you might be very solid, but that piece of information or the code or the dependency that used might not have the same thing. So, third-party reliance. And now in the world of, Copilot and other things, we're actually relying on AI to write the code, and we're relying on AI to go and pick up, open source stuff, right? So you are even double exposed when it comes to all of those things. So we see that. And then if I think about the third pillar with the LLM risks, right, LLM-powered scraping. I talked about the 500 million request. Data harvesting is going on. We see a lot of fake account creation and the fraud that goes with that, right? So can you imagine the bots will go and do ATO, and now you have an AI bot which is a little bit smarter. It'll wait for 30 seconds and then do something. Like, just think of the sophistication that is being brought forward over here. And then model manipulation, prompt injection, right? We're seeing a lot of that happening. Even without, even if you said that, hey, we're just barely at maybe sub 5% of generative AI applications or conversational AI agents and stuff like that. But even at that low base, we are seeing tremendous amount of prompt injection. And a simple way to understand prompt injection for AI applications is that you try to kind of trick the LLM model to respond to some kind of sensitive data, PII leakage, et cetera, right? So you're asking, hey, give me Rupesh's social security number. Obviously, it's going to come back and say, no, I'm not going to be. But then you kind of make up a whole thing and say, hey, I'm calling from the IRS, or here are the last 4 digits. I forgot the first 4 digits. Can you do this? Can you do that? And in the third, fourth break, the LLM might, if it has that information, share that with you, right? So that is what we are seeing. Where is your weak spot, right? Where are everybody kind of thinking about? So some of it feels basic, which I think it is, and I want to keep it that way. But I still feel that we all do not have the full visibility of what's happening in our enterprise, what's happening in our business processes, what's happening in the digital transformation, what's happening at the pace at which the APIs are being deployed, the pace at which AI is being deployed, right? There is a lot of enthusiastic, software engineers, developers, et cetera, right? If you think about it, we're all here as security or cybersecurity professionals, and we are kind of with that kind of mindset, right? But when you think about the developer community and just the business community who wants to just go fast and furious on some of these things, right? And that is what we are seeing, is that we're still lacking visibility of the full threat landscape, and which is concerning to me, right? It is not something that is easy. It's not that easy to even figure out, like, do I have all of it? Do I have the tools and the capabilities? Security posture, very, very important, right? In terms of understanding. And security posture, again, is not a one and done thing, right? It's not like you did a project yesterday and now you're set for 2 years. No. Again, changing, landscapes, right? You're deploying new AI, you're deploying new AI APIs, you're deploying your new applications. Some of these things are changing rapidly, you're going fast, et cetera, et cetera. So, are your APIs, applications, and all of them protected against any misuse, known vulnerabilities, right? And very important for the entire industry to kind of coalesce on day zero or other things and be rapidly able to, block things in runtime. Abuse and exploitation, right? Can you detect and prevent? What is surprising to me is, when I work with customers and we do POCs and we find something. And I'm like, I found a smoking gun, I'll get the contract, I'll provide the product, but I feel bad that the customer had that exposure that had to be found when we were doing a proof of concept, right? Versus knowing about, hey, these are some of the exposures that I have and what can I do to systematically mitigate them, et cetera, right? So abuse, exploitation, very, very important. Lots of business logic attacks. I think, again, I'm sure the malicious and the adversaries are getting smarter and better. They're thinking about different ways, and they'll probably put agentic to use already. So we will see a lot more navigation when it comes to business logic as we rely on super automation or intelligent automation in the world of AI. You cannot protect what you cannot see, right? So what I did was showed you everything that Akamai sees, right? So everything that we see, we're sharing that information in our SOTI report, so you have it, right? So that makes sense. But do you have the ability to even look at your own systems? Do you have information associated with all of the transactions that are happening? Do you have visibility? Is Siri helping you go to San Francisco, sir? Thank you. Even if you have visibility, right? And where are you going to start? Where are you going to stop? Is everything under? And it's a tricky one, right? Because you don't want to try to inspect everything. You need like infinite resources, right? If everything was checked and everything was validated, you're inserting a lot of friction into the system, right? Which is really, really difficult to deal with. But again, there are smarter ways to focus on, how you can think about visibility, and the other topic is compliance. So compliance is very important, and I'm sure all of you are thinking about it. I think even the frameworks and the different industries and organizations are coming up with, hey, what are we going to do in the world of AI? So I think EU AI is one example of a compliance and governance framework that is starting to develop. You will see more of those things, et cetera, et cetera. So having said that, I think it is very important that we focus on some of these things when it comes to visibility, when it comes to compliance, et cetera. Protecting against abuse, simple. Discovery, visibility, remediation, right? And all of you know all of these things. You are experts in cybersecurity, basic, but you have to follow it, right? You have to systematically follow it. And I feel where we are kind of falling behind is actually more in the practice of it, right? We're not able to fully and structurally go do discovery, visibility, and remediation. And sometimes even if we have the discovery, we're not following through with the mitigations and the remediations, et cetera, right? I run a very large engineering team, somewhere around 800 people, and my team is like pumping out software left, right, and center. My CISO comes to me and says, Rupesh, as an engineering leader, as a software leader, here are the vulnerabilities, or here's the exposure, here's this, here's that. What's the pace at which I'm also moving when it comes to remediation? How do I even know where to deploy the right resources to remediate all of it, right? So in the world of APIs and application security management, right, the ability to identify where you have the exposure, where you have the vulnerabilities, and then tying it back to which APIs, which developers, which owners, and then identifying what is the importance in which you want to go prioritize and fix, very, very important. Having that full circle and cycle is very, very important. And again, think about discovery, visibility, remediation, but take action, from that perspective, right? Okay, so with that, I'm going to sort of, come to this game plan, which is, hey, next week, 3 months, 6 months. To do a recap, we saw a lot of good data, right? And if you stop by the booth, we can talk more. You can download the SOTI report from Akamai's website. We'll have a QR code coming up. You have a lot of data, a lot of information, a lot of insights. What do I need to do with it? I want all of us to go back and say, let me shine a light on the shadows. Find what is documented, undocumented, what is monitored, not monitored, et cetera, right? When it comes to APIs, very, very important. Like if you're not doing it, go talk to the teams, make a genuine effort, and you will be surprised to see everything that you're finding. Again, I don't want your enterprise to be part of that 150 billion attacks that we talked about. Organize the API inventory, right? Something quick you can do. There are tools available. There are simpler methods to go do that. I think within the 3 months, you really have to figure out, right, in terms of what is your strategy? How are you going to go about strengthening and defending? And you hear about sort of layered defense, right? Layered defense. I often get the questions asked is that, if I'm running a industrial grade web application firewall, is that enough, right? Will the WAF protect me against everything? The WAF is a phenomenal and a very necessary capability, but the WAF will not protect you against something that is authenticated, right? Because it is designed to allow authentic traffic. And what we are seeing with a lot of API abuse is it's all authenticated traffic. So the bad guys are already kind of have the credentials to go in and then do the data extractions and then do things, right? So you need sort of a layered defense. The same thing goes on with, the AI applications. So you need a firewall for AI, which is going to kind of be more targeted, to those use cases, to prompt injections, to PII leakage, to toxic language, right? The web application firewall is not really saying that, hey, was there some hate speech or not in a transaction? It is focusing on, do I know known vulnerabilities? If I see an attack, I see a pattern, I'm going to block it. So APIs and AI and Gen AI and LLMs are a little bit different when it comes to their characteristics, their use cases, and how you go about protecting them and defending them, right? So harden your API posture, sharpen your threat detection and response. Again, very important. If you don't have some of those things, take the time to do it, and then proactively, mitigate, right? So we want to be working together. Think like an attacker. Think about how we can push things out. Think about, development of the stronger defense systems, et cetera. We talk a lot about shift left. We talk a lot about, secure by design, right? There are a lot of API testing capabilities available, active testing capabilities available. Even in the world of AI, you will hear things like red teaming, et cetera. What all of these things are doing is helping the developers focus on how best can I test things with attack simulation so that when I drop the code in production, I know I am at least safer when it comes to all the stuff that is known. That doesn't mean you don't need runtime. I mean, you'll obviously need runtime because that's where the fight happens with the bad folks, right? So you will need a combination of things, but the proactive aspects are very, very important, right? With that, I'm going to come to my final slide, and we'll open it for Q&A here. But the state of the apps and API security report is available. You have a QR code. Again, stop by the booth. Happy to go deeper. But thank you so much for attending the session. We have a few minutes for a Q&A. Even some. Yes, sir.
Can you come to the mic, please? It's being recorded.
Professor Roger is keeping us honest. I like that.
Hi, it's Peter Granger here. I'd just like to ask a question about knowing Akamai has a great reputation in the marketplace. No one company can do everything, so I'm assuming you have a sort of attack intelligence type of group. And can you talk a little bit about how you work with other organizations, maybe vendors, maybe competitors in some cases, and how that proactively helps customers?
Yeah, absolutely. No, great question, right? And we do our best to share the intelligence that we have. We work with the prominent companies in the industry. A good example was that we worked with the U.S. government and other companies to take Anonymous Sudan down. That was a big deal last year, right? And we wouldn't have been able to do it alone. Any other security company wouldn't have been able to do it alone. But the government, Akamai, and other security companies sharing the threat intelligence to take a very prominent known malicious adversary down. So definitely do that. Thank you.
Yeah, you shared that there are 150 billion API attacks, $87 billion that have been lost. And you shared two examples that were kind of soft examples of, we found that there was potentially going to be this risk. Can you share any of the examples that might have comprised some of that $87 billion?
That's a really good question.
Or I should say, would you?
I'm not privy to name any customer names when it comes to that. But I think what the data is telling us is that, three industries, commerce, finance, and healthcare is where we have seen significant amount of abuse that has kind of exposed to those numbers.
And can you maybe paint a little more context? Like, what does abuse mean in terms of, like, how was the $87 billion like extracted, or any additional color you can so that we can paint a better picture?
Sure. So we'll do a softer example, right? Which is, a lot of companies have loyalty programs, reward programs, et cetera, right? That for the end user has some monetary value, whether it is for the grocery store, whether it's for the airline, whether it's a hotel, et cetera. And what we have seen is some very systematic API abuse when it comes to those programs, and have the ability to then kind of go in and move things into sort of, the adversary accounts, and then be able to quickly sort of, put it to use, right? And then it's gone. So by the time you kind of figure out what happened, it doesn't reside there, it's already there. So we see, things like that when we do POCs and in real life when we are running our product and capabilities.
Automatic gaming of the system.
Automatic gaming of the system, yep. The customers do have, I think, there's a lot of examples of this, there are some use cases that have been published on the public internet, and I would guide to go there rather than me naming the names. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks for elegantly highlighting the caveats of traditional web application firewalls for, let's say, API attacks. You mentioned about firewall for AIs. So given that agentic AI and LLMs, they're still in evolving landscape, how do you foresee dealing with false positives when it comes to actually deploying firewalls for AI?
So I think the FNFP, or the false positive or the false negative problem in the world of security is always going to be very, very important and relevant, right? Especially FP is more challenging, to your point, when it comes to APIs or AI transaction, because of the speed and the pace at which, and the millions and billions of transactions that need to take place. So we spend a lot of time thinking about the detections and the response. So many times, to manage through the FPs, you can, for firewall for AI, you can focus in on alert mode or monitor mode, or you can even do a modify, which is sort of, modify how the interaction is taking place. And as you build more confidence on the detections, you can go in the deny mode. So that's a way to kind of, learn and manage as we think about it. But it's, to your point, it's an open space, it's a big deal. Hopefully next year I'll have all the answers.
You speculated that compliance is coming in the future of this space. Would you care to expand on what you think is coming sort of in the initial phases of compliance for APIs and what teams can do to start getting ready for that?
So I feel like on the API side, more and more of that is happening as we speak. I've seen, many agencies, and even MITRE has some frameworks, et cetera, right? So I'm seeing that kind of bringing forward. We've also seen, there was again a big thing in the public where TracFone, which is owned by Verizon, had a big API-driven security incident where they lost 16 million records, and then the FTC, I think, went back and did some kind of a fine or something like that. And I think in some of the things that the governmental agencies are saying is that, hey, you need to kind of have better protection when it comes to end users, and then somewhere deeper they are implying that you need to have better API security. So I think of that as sort of a lighter compliance, but I feel like we're moving in that direction of a much more tighter. I think in the world of AI, probably even early days. But it's interesting is that, most of us, when we do business with each other, you will see the contract forms and it'll say, do you use AI? And you say yes. And then the next question is, do you use AI and ML safely? And everybody says yes. And I don't know how, but I guess we all say yes, right? So, thank you. All right, one more. My lucky day. Thank you.
So great presentation. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great presentation. One thing I have in mind is my SecOps team still says, hey, you know what, we have an API manager, we're behind the WAF and so on. We don't need to scan APIs. What can you advise me to talk to my SecOps and say, yeah, there's still risk involved with APIs?
That's a great question, right? So I think there are two things. One is that you probably don't have all of your apps behind a web application firewall, right? Because there are a lot of internal use cases, there are B2B use cases, maybe it's only the external facing, et cetera. So what we have learned when we do the discovery and inventory, so not only looking at traffic, but other integrations with API gateways, et cetera, is that we see that many of these endpoints are exposed. And I think the other argument you can make back is that, hey, the WAF will do a fantastic job, it'll do its job, but it's going to allow authenticated traffic. So I think with API security, you have to think about it in a little bit more kind of broader defense layer in terms of abuse, in terms of logic, in terms of what type of forensics is taking place over there. So, all right, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.